A millionaire kicked three little girls out of his car in the rain. "You're not my kids," he said, and left them at a gas station. 25 years later, they walked into his boardroom and called him Dad. Welcome to African Legacy Tales, where stories of resilience and justice come alive. Can you imagine being abandoned in the cold, with nowhere to go? Stick with us to uncover a tale of betrayal and redemption that'll leave you speechless. Tell me, where are you listening from? And be honest. Could you forgive him? Take a breath and enjoy the story. Imagine three sisters, left alone in the rain, their world shattered. How did they rise from that moment to seize an empire? Stay tuned to African Legacy Tales to find out. "Get out," Ed Frankel said, his voice as cold as the November rain pelting the roof of his Mercedes. "Your mother's gone. You're not my responsibility anymore." The three 14-year-old girls stared at him in disbelief, their nearly identical faces reflecting shock and confusion as the gas station lights cast harsh shadows across their features. "But Dad," Debbie began, her voice breaking. "I'm not your father," Ed snapped, adjusting his Italian silk tie. "I never was. How does a man who has everything decide three young lives are disposable? What happens when wealth and power strip away the facade of family?" In the cold fluorescent light of a rural gas station, three sisters were about to discover just how quickly life could unravel. Rain streaked down the windows of the luxury car as Ed, CEO of Frankel Hotels, one of the most prestigious hospitality chains in the country, made a decision that would echo through decades. Just 7 days after burying his wife Kathy, he was abandoning her daughters at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. But Mom just died. Suzanne, the most outspoken of the triplets, stepped forward. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," Ed replied, reaching for the door handle. "Your mother left everything to me, not to you. I never wanted children, especially not." He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Not black children, not three girls who reminded him daily that his wife had loved another man first. "I've given the station attendant $200, Ed continued, not meeting their eyes. "That's more than generous. Call a relative." "We don't have any other family," Doris, the quietest of the three, whispered. "Mom was all we had." "Then I suggest you figure something out," Ed said, closing the door. The girls stood huddled together under the meager shelter of the gas station awning, their small suitcases at their feet, watching as the tail lights of their stepfather's car disappeared into the rainy night. Debbie clutched the locket her mother had given her just before she died, a family heirloom containing a tiny photo of the three of them with their mother. "She told me to keep this safe," Debbie said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "She said it was more valuable than it looked." "What are we going to do?" Doris asked, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the raindrops. Suzanne squared her shoulders, her eyes hardening as she watched the place where Ed's car had vanished. "We're going to survive," she said firmly. "And someday he'll regret this. I promise you both. Someday he'll regret ever meeting us." Inside the locket, hidden behind the photo, was a tiny key. None of the girls knew what it opened, but Kathy had whispered to Debbie in her final moments, "When the time is right, this will unlock everything he tried to take from you." As they stood abandoned in the rain, they couldn't possibly know that 25 years later, they would walk into Ed's office at Frankel Hotel's headquarters, no longer frightened children, but powerful women with that very key and the secret it had protected for all these years. The station attendant, an older man with kind eyes, approached them hesitantly. "You girls can come inside until we figure something out. I called my wife. She says you can stay with us tonight." But as they gathered their meager belongings, a sleek black car pulled into the station, its headlights cutting through the rain. The window rolled down, revealing a woman with intelligent eyes and a determined expression. "Are you the Frankel girls?" she asked, studying them intently. "Yes," Suzanne answered cautiously. "My name is Rosa Taylor." "I was your mother's lawyer," the woman said. "I've been looking for you. Get in. There's something your mother wanted you to know." The girls exchanged glances. Who was this woman? And what did she know about their mother? More importantly, what had Kathy Frankel set in motion before her death? 25 years later, Ed Frankel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, surveying the Manhattan skyline like a king overlooking his domain. At 62, his hair had silvered at the temples, lending him a distinguished appearance that complemented his tailored suit and the gold H cufflinks that had become his trademark. The Frankel Hotel's logo, that same stylized H, adorned the building across the street, a constant reminder of the empire he'd built, or rather, the empire he'd taken. "Mr. Frankel, the board is waiting," his assistant, Teresa, announced from the doorway. Ed nodded without turning around. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." The past quarter-century had been good to Ed. After Kathy's death, he had transformed her modest chain of boutique hotels into an international luxury brand. Frankel Hotels now had properties on 5 continents, each one more opulent than the last. The business magazines called him a visionary, a business genius. None of them knew the truth, that the original vision had been Kathy's, that the initial designs and business model had come from her brilliant mind. And none of them knew about the 3 girls he'd left at that gas station in Georgia. Ed took a sip of his whiskey, pushing away the unwelcome memory. He'd made his choice that night and had never looked back. Whatever had happened to Kathy's daughters wasn't his concern. They were nothing to him, just reminders of the fact that his wife had been married before, had loved a black man who died too young, leaving her with triplet daughters Ed had been forced to accept as part of the package. He straightened his tie and turned toward the door. The board meeting today was crucial. They were discussing the acquisition of a struggling boutique hotel chain that would give Frankel Hotels a foothold in emerging markets across Southeast Asia. As he strode into the boardroom, the conversation hushed. His CFO, Chris Weiss, stood awkwardly, his usual confidence notably absent. "Ed," Chris began, clearing his throat. "Before we start, there's been a development you should know about." Ed frowned. "What development?" Chris glanced at the other board members, none of whom would meet Ed's eyes. "Frankel Luxury Properties has withdrawn their bid for the Lotus chain." "What? Why would they do that?" Ed demanded. Frankel Luxury Properties was their sister company handling their real estate acquisitions. "They've been acquired," Chris said carefully. "Acquired by whom?" When the news hit, Ed felt like he'd been physically struck. The subsidiary was publicly traded but had always maintained Frankel Hotels as the majority shareholder. The paperwork was filed this morning. A private equity firm called Triple Crown Investments has been quietly buying shares for months. They crossed the threshold for controlling interest last week. Ed felt the blood drain from his face. "Who are they? What do we know about them?" "Very little," Chris admitted. "They're new, but extremely well-funded, and they've requested a meeting with you." "When?" "Now," Chris said, nodding toward the door. Ed turned to see his assistant opening the boardroom door. 3 women entered, all in their late 30s, all dressed in impeccably tailored business attire, all with identical expressions of cool assessment as they regarded him, and all with faces that, despite the passage of 25 years, he recognized instantly. Rosa Taylor had been more than Kathy Frankel's lawyer. She'd been her best friend since college. On the night the girl's mother died, Rosa had made a promise she would protect Kathy's daughters and ensure they received their rightful inheritance, no matter what legal maneuvering Ed attempted. "Your mother suspected Ed might try something like this," Rosa had told them that rainy night as they drove away from the gas station. "That's why she came to see me in secret last month when she received her diagnosis." Debbie, Suzanne, and Doris had listened in stunned silence as Rosa explained that their mother had created a trust for them, separate from the assets Ed could control. "It's not much," Rosa had admitted. "Just one small hotel property and some investments, but it's something. And more importantly, it contains all of your mother's original business plans and designs, her vision for what Frankel Hotels could become." That small inheritance had been enough. The sisters, guided by Rosa, had thrown themselves into education, Suzanne studying business and law, Debbie focusing on architecture and design, and Doris developing expertise in hospitality management and marketing. Together, with the foundation of their mother's original vision, they had built Triple Crown Investments from the ground up, operating in stealth for years with a single goal: reclaiming their mother's legacy. Now, as they stood in the boardroom of Frankel Hotels, the culmination of their 25-year plan was within reach. Hello, Ed, Suzanne said, her voice cool and professional, betraying none of the emotions roiling beneath the surface. It's been a long time. Ed's face had lost all color. What are you doing here? We're here to discuss the future of Frankel Hotels, Debbie replied, setting her portfolio on the table. Our company has acquired controlling interest in your real estate division, and now we're prepared to make an offer for Frankel Hotels itself, Doris added, her quiet voice carrying an undercurrent of steel. Ed looked from one to the other, stunned disbelief giving way to anger. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly have the resources to. We've secured financing, Suzanne interrupted, sliding a document across the table. Our offer is fair. Some might even say generous. You can review it with your lawyers, of course, but the board has already received copies. Chris shifted uncomfortably. Ed, I've looked at the preliminary figures. It's a solid offer. This is absurd, Ed sputtered. You can't just walk in here and. We can, Debbie said firmly. And we have. The gas station where you abandoned us was owned by Rosa Taylor's uncle. Did you know that? You happened to choose the perfect place to leave us, right where someone was waiting to help. We've spent 25 years building toward this moment, Doris said, learning everything about the hotel business, about finance, about you. Suzanne leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. We know about the changes you made to Mom's will. We know about the trust fund you diverted, the properties you transferred to your name before she was even buried. Ed's face had gone from pale to ashen. You can't prove any of that. Debbie reached for the locket she still wore around her neck and opened it. From behind the photo, she extracted the tiny key. Actually, we can. Mom knew what you were planning. This key opens a safe deposit box containing the original copies of all the documents you thought you'd destroyed. The boardroom had gone completely silent, the other executives watching the confrontation with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. You have 24 hours to accept our offer, Suzanne stated. After that, we go public with everything we know. Your choice, Ed. As the three women turned to leave, Doris paused at the door. Oh, and Ed, we're changing the company name back to what Mom originally wanted, Frankel Lawrence Hotels, to honor both our parents. After they left, Ed collapsed into his chair, his world crumbling around him. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. With trembling fingers, he opened his inbox to find a message with a single attachment, a photograph of Kathy holding her 3 infant daughters, standing beside a handsome black man with a warm smile. Written on the back were the words, the true founders of Frankel Hotels, Kathy and Steve Lawrence, with their daughters, Debbie, Suzanne, and Doris. As Ed stared at the image, another email arrived, this one from his bank, notifying him of a freeze on his accounts pending an investigation into potential fraud. Just as the implications of this were sinking in, the boardroom door opened again. But instead of the triplets returning, a different unwelcome figure stood in the doorway, FBI Special Agent Adam Tanner. Ed Frankel, the agent asked, though it wasn't really a question. We need to talk about some irregularities in your financial records over the past 25 years. Behind Agent Tanner, Ed could see the three sisters watching from the hallway, their expressions unreadable. What else had they discovered? And more importantly, what evidence had they uncovered? Ed Frankel had never spent a night in jail before. The holding cell was cold, the bench uncomfortable, and the fluorescent lights never dimmed. His lawyer had assured him this was temporary, just a formality, while they sorted out the misunderstanding. But as the hours dragged on, Ed couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. 24 hours earlier, he'd been one of the most powerful men in the hospitality industry. Now he was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his personal belongings confiscated, his reputation in tatters. Frankel, a guard called, unlocking the cell door. Your lawyer's here. Ed followed the guard down a sterile corridor to a small meeting room where Chris Weiss waited, looking haggard and uncomfortable in his rumpled suit. Chris, Ed said, relief washing over him. Thank God. Get me out of here. Chris didn't meet his eyes. I'm not here as your lawyer, Ed. I'm here as the CFO of Frankel Hotels. What are you talking about? The board called an emergency meeting after your arrest. I've been authorized to negotiate with Triple Crown Investments on behalf of the company. Ed stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. I built that company. Did you? Chris asked quietly. Because according to the documents Agent Tanner showed us, Kathy Lawrence Frankel designed the original business model, secured the initial investors, and established the first 5 properties before you even entered the picture. Those documents are forgeries, Ed snapped. Those girls are trying to steal my company. They've been authenticated by 3 independent experts, Chris replied. And there's more. The FBI has evidence that you systematically diverted funds from Kathy's trust for her daughters, falsified her will after her death, and committed tax fraud to hide the transactions. He took a deep breath. The board has voted to accept Triple Crown's offer, contingent on the resolution of these legal issues. Ed sank into the chair, the magnitude of his situation finally hitting him. They can't do this. They already have, Chris said. I'm here to present their terms. I don't want to hear their terms, Ed growled. That's unfortunate, because your only alternative is facing multiple federal charges. Chris slid a document across the table. They're willing to drop all civil claims against you personally in exchange for your resignation and cooperation in the transition. The FBI investigation, however, is out of their hands. Ed scoffed. So, I'm supposed to just hand everything over to them and then go to prison? How is that a deal? They're also offering to provide evidence of mitigating circumstances to the prosecutors, Chris continued. If you cooperate fully, you might avoid jail time altogether. Ed stared at the document, his mind racing. I want to speak with them directly. Chris checked his watch. They're waiting outside. The door opened, and the 3 sisters walked in, each carrying identical leather portfolios embossed with the Triple Crown logo. They sat across from Ed, their posture and expressions mirroring each other in a way that was both striking and unsettling. You've been busy, Ed said coldly. 25 years busy, Suzanne replied, her tone matter-of-fact. While you were expanding Frankel Hotels by cutting corners and exploiting workers, we were building Triple Crown Investments the right way. Mom's way, Debbie added, with ethical business practices and genuine concern for employees and communities. We're not here to gloat, Doris said, her quiet voice a contrast to her sister's. We're here to offer you a chance to avoid the worst consequences of your actions. Ed leaned back, trying to project confidence he no longer felt. Why would you do that? I thought this was your revenge. This isn't about revenge, Suzanne said firmly. It's about justice and reclaiming what rightfully belongs to us. Debbie opened her portfolio and removed a photograph, the same one Ed had seen in the email yesterday. Our father, Steve Lawrence, was an architect who designed the first Frankel Hotel with our mother. They were partners in every sense. When he died unexpectedly, Doris continued, Mom was left with 3 infants and a business in its early stages. That's when she met you. You saw an opportunity, Suzanne said, her gaze unwavering. A beautiful widow with a promising business concept and no male partner to protect her interests. You're rewriting history, Ed protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Debbie pulled out another document, an original marriage certificate. You married her 6 months after Dad died and then systematically began taking control of her business decisions. We have her journals, Doris said softly. She documented everything, how you gradually pushed her out of management roles, how you took credit for her innovations, how you isolated her from her friends and advisors. And we have the evidence of what you did after she died, Suzanne concluded. The changed will, the diverted trust fund, the falsified documents, it's all there, Ed. The question is whether you want to face the full legal consequences or accept our terms. Ed stared at them, these 3 women who had once been frightened girls he'd abandoned without a second thought. They were nothing like he remembered. They were poised, confident, and clearly in control of the situation. And yet he could still see Kathy in them. Debbie had her eyes, Suzanne her determined chin, and Doris her contemplative gaze. What exactly are your terms? He finally asked. Suzanne pushed a document toward him. Full cooperation in the transition, resignation from the board, public acknowledgement of Kathy and Steve Lawrence as the founders of the company, and your testimony against the financial advisors who helped you hide the transactions. In exchange, Debbie continued, we'll provide evidence to the prosecutors that you've made restitution, which should significantly reduce any penalties you face and will allow you to retain ownership of the villa in Barcelona. It wasn't part of Mom's original holdings, so we consider it yours, Doris added. Ed picked up the document, skimming the terms. It was a remarkably fair offer, considering what they could have demanded. Still, the thought of surrendering everything he'd spent the last 25 years building was almost unbearable. Why aren't you pushing for maximum charges? He asked suspiciously. You could send me to prison for the rest of my life. The sisters exchanged glances. It was Doris who finally answered. Before she died, Mom made us promise something. She said, don't let bitterness consume you. Use what I've taught you to build, not to destroy. We're honoring that promise, Debbie said. This isn't mercy, Ed. It's just us refusing to become like you. Ed looked down at the agreement again, then at the photograph of Kathy with Steve and their infant daughters, the family he tried to erase. I'll need my attorney to review this, he said finally. Of course, Suzanne nodded. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow. After that, we proceed with or without your cooperation. As they gathered their materials to leave, Ed found himself speaking without intending to. Why did you wait 25 years? You could have exposed me sooner. The sisters paused at the door. We needed to be ready, Suzanne answered. We needed to be stronger than you, Debbie added. And we needed to understand the business well enough to protect it, Doris finished. After they left, Ed sat alone in the interview room, the agreement before him. Outside, he could hear the muffled sounds of the police station, phones ringing, officers talking, the occasional burst of radio chatter. His world had changed irrevocably in the span of 24 hours. Just as the guard returned to escort him back to his cell, his lawyer burst into the room, looking even more agitated than Chris had. Ed, we have a problem, he said without preamble. The FBI has found Kathy's original medical records. What? Why does that matter? Because, his lawyer said grimly, the cause of death listed in the official documents doesn't match what's in her doctor's files, and they've interviewed the housekeeper who was working for you at the time. Ed felt the blood drain from his face. What are you saying? I'm saying they're looking into whether Kathy's death was really from natural causes, his lawyer replied. And the housekeeper has made some very troubling statements about the days leading up to her death. As the implications sank in, Ed realized the Triplets' offer wasn't just fair, it might be his only lifeline. But what did they know about their mother's death? And what would they do if they discovered the truth? The Lawrence sisters sat in the back of their hired car, silent as they left the police station. The rain tapping against the windows mirrored the tension in the vehicle, a quiet, persistent reminder of another rainy night 25 years ago. Do you think he'll take the deal? Doris finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He doesn't have a choice, Suzanne replied, checking her phone for updates from their legal team. Debbie stared out the window, watching the city lights blur through the raindrops. We didn't mention what Linda told the FBI about Mom's death. Linda Vasquez had been the Frankels' housekeeper for nearly 30 years. She had adored Kathy and had been suspicious about the circumstances of her death from the beginning. When the sisters had tracked her down 2 years ago, she'd been eager to share what she knew. I thought it was odd, Linda had told them in her small apartment filled with family photos. Your mother had been sick, yes, but she was improving. The doctors were optimistic. Then, suddenly, she took a turn for the worse. After Ed returned from his business trip, Linda had noticed other troubling details, medication bottles that seemed emptier than they should have been, Ed's insistence on being the only one to administer Kathy's medicine, his refusal to let the nurses stay overnight in the days before she died. I didn't know what to think then, Linda had said. But I kept the medicine bottles. I didn't throw them away like he told me to. I hid them. She had pulled a plastic bag from a locked drawer containing 3 prescription bottles with Kathy's name. I always thought someday someone should look at these. Those bottles were now in FBI custody, being tested for tampering. We need to be prepared for what the FBI might find, Suzanne said now, bringing Debbie's attention back to the present. If he had anything to do with Mom's death, Debbie began, unable to finish the thought. Then he'll face those charges separately, Suzanne said firmly. That's for the justice system to handle, not us. Doris reached for her sister's hands. Remember what Rosa always told us? Don't let your thirst for justice turn into a hunger for revenge. The car pulled up to their hotel, not a Frankel property, but a competitor's luxury establishment. As they walked through the lobby, heads turned. Their story hadn't broken in the media yet, but it would soon. By this time tomorrow, everyone would know that the abandoned Lawrence triplets had orchestrated one of the most remarkable corporate takeovers in recent memory. In their suite, Rosa was waiting for them, her once dark hair now silver, her sharp mind undimmed by age. At 65, she remained their most trusted advisor and the closest thing to a mother they'd had since Kathy died. Well, she asked as they entered. He's considering the offer, Suzanne replied, setting down her portfolio. Rosa nodded, satisfied. And how did he react when you showed him the evidence? Like a cornered animal, Debbie said. Desperate, defensive. But he didn't seem surprised about the financial fraud accusations, Doris noted thoughtfully. It was almost like he expected those to come to light eventually. What he didn't expect, Suzanne added, was for the FBI to look into Mom's death. Rosa's expression darkened. Linda's testimony changed everything. If the FBI can prove that Ed tampered with Kathy's medication, it would explain why he was so desperate to get rid of us immediately after she died. He needed to secure everything before any questions could be asked, Debbie said. There's something else, Doris said quietly. The others turned to her, as the most reserved of the triplets. When Doris spoke up, they all listened. I've been reviewing the trust documents again. There's a clause we missed. If Kathy died before we turned 21, and if Ed remarried within 5 years of her death, the entire estate would revert to us upon our 21st birthday. What? Suzanne exclaimed. How did we miss that? Because Ed had those pages removed from the copies in the public record, Rosa said, comprehension dawning on her face. But they would have been in the original document in that safe deposit box. He did remarry, Debbie said slowly. 4 years and 10 months after Mom died, to that Italian socialite, Lucille Rossi. Rosa confirmed. They divorced less than a year later. So, he fulfilled the condition that would have triggered our inheritance, Suzanne said. But by then, he'd already hidden the trust documents and abandoned us. He made sure we'd never know about our claim. Until now, Doris concluded. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For years, they had believed they were fighting to reclaim what had been unjustly taken. Now, they discovered they had legally owned the company since their 21st birthday, 14 years ago. This changes our negotiating position, Suzanne said, already reaching for her phone to call their lawyer. Wait, Debbie cautioned. If we bring this up now, Ed might panic. Let's see if he accepts the current offer first. I agree, Rosa said. The FBI investigation into Kathy's death is unknown territory. We need to proceed carefully. As they debated their next steps, Doris's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then answered immediately, putting it on speaker. Agent Tanner. Miss Lawrence, the FBI agent's voice filled the room. We've completed the preliminary tests on your mother's medication bottles. The sisters exchanged tense glances. The diazepam contained 3 times the prescribed dosage, Tanner continued. And we found traces of another substance that wasn't prescribed to your mother at all, a powerful sedative that, combined with her other medications, would have suppressed her respiratory system. Debbie covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. We're preparing to question Mr. Frankel about this development, Tanner said. But given your involvement in the case, I wanted to inform you first. Thank you, Agent Tanner, Suzanne managed, her voice tight with emotion. After the call ended, none of them spoke for several minutes. The confirmation of what they had suspected for years, that their mother's death might not have been natural, was overwhelming. He killed her, Debbie whispered finally. He actually killed her. We don't know that for certain, Rosa cautioned. Over-medication could have been a mistake or negligence. Combined with a drug that wasn't prescribed to her at all? Suzanne asked incredulously. That's not a mistake, Rosa. Either way, it's in the FBI's hands now, Doris said. We need to focus on what we can control. Rosa's phone rang, and she answered it. After a brief conversation, she turned to the sisters. Ed's lawyer wants to meet tonight. He says Ed is ready to sign the agreement, but he wants one modification. What modification? Suzanne asked suspiciously. He wants to meet with you three privately before he signs. The sisters looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. After 25 years of working together, they rarely needed words to understand each other's thoughts. Tell them we'll meet with Ed, Suzanne decided, but only with our security team present. As Rosa made the arrangements, Debbie pulled her sisters into their bedroom, away from prying ears. If he did kill Mom, she said in a hushed voice, and if he knows the FBI is investigating her death, he might be desperate enough to try anything. He's under police supervision, Doris reminded her. He can't hurt us. I'm not worried about our physical safety, Debbie replied. I'm worried about what he might say, what secrets he might reveal. Suzanne nodded in understanding. You're thinking about Mom's letter, the one she left with the key. The letter had been brief, written in Kathy's elegant hand during her final days. My darling daughters, there are things about your father, about both your fathers, that you don't know. When you're ready, the truth is waiting in this box. I hope you'll understand why I kept these secrets. I only wanted to protect you. Inside the safe deposit box, along with the documents that had helped them build their case against Ed, they had found a sealed envelope with "When you've reclaimed your birthright" written on it. Following their mother's wishes, they had kept it sealed. Maybe it's time to open it, Doris suggested. Before we meet with Ed. What if it changes everything? Debbie asked. What if there's something in there that undermines what we're trying to do? Mom wouldn't have done that to us, Suzanne said firmly. Whatever's in that letter, she meant for it to help us. As night fell over the city, the sisters prepared to face Ed Frankel one more time. But before that confrontation, they had another revelation waiting, the final message from the mother they had lost too soon, and the secrets that had died with her. Or had they? The sealed envelope felt unnaturally heavy in Debbie's hands as she sat between her sisters on the sofa in their hotel suite. 25 years of questions, of struggling to piece together fragments of their history, had led to this moment. Whatever secrets their mother had kept were about to be revealed. We should have opened this years ago, Debbie whispered. Mom said to wait until we'd reclaimed our birthright, Suzanne reminded her. We're only now at that threshold. Doris placed a reassuring hand on Debbie's wrist. Whatever's in there, we face it together, like we faced everything else. With trembling fingers, Debbie broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. The triplets leaned forward, reading their mother's elegant handwriting together. My beloved daughters, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth about the company and have taken steps to reclaim what Ed tried to steal from you. I'm so proud of the women you must have become to accomplish this. There's one more truth you need to know, a secret I've kept even from Ed. It concerns your birth and your father, Steve. Steve Lawrence was not your biological father. The sisters exchanged stunned glances before continuing to read. Before I met Steve, I was briefly involved with Ed Frankel. It was a mistake. We were wrong for each other in every way, and I ended the relationship quickly. When I discovered I was pregnant, I had already met Steve, who was kind, brilliant, and everything Ed was not. Steve knew the truth from the beginning and loved you as his own. We agreed never to tell anyone, including Ed, who was already married to someone else at the time. Steve legally adopted you at birth, and we built our life together. Years later, after Steve died and I was struggling with both grief and the business, Ed reappeared in my life. He was divorced by then and seemed changed, more mature, less selfish. When he asked me to marry him, I was vulnerable and lonely. I never told him the truth about your paternity. I realize now that Ed may have suspected something, the timing of my pregnancy, the coincidence of our reconnection. Perhaps he put it together, but if he knew, he never mentioned it. I'm telling you this now because you deserve to know your full history. Ed Frankel is your biological father, the very man who abandoned you. The irony is bitter, I know, but Steve Lawrence was your true father in every way that matters. He loved you, nurtured you, and helped shape the foundation of who you are. Blood doesn't define family. Love does. I hope this knowledge doesn't change your course. The company still rightfully belongs to you. It was built with Steve's designs and my vision, long before Ed entered our lives. I love you, my beautiful daughters. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that I support you across the divide of time, forever. Your loving mother, Kathy. Silence filled the room as the sisters absorbed the revelation. The man they'd spent 25 years building a case against, the man who had callously abandoned them at a gas station, was their biological father. This can't be true, Debbie finally said, her voice hollow. It explains why he always seemed to resent us, Doris whispered. He must have suspected. Suzanne stood abruptly, pacing the room. It doesn't change anything. He still abandoned us. He still took what should have been ours. It changes everything, Debbie countered. What if he does know? What if that's why he wants to meet with us before signing the agreement? Their contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Rosa entered, looking concerned. Ed's lawyer just called again. She said Ed has been released on bail pending further investigation, and he's insisted on having the meeting at his penthouse rather than at our lawyer's office. Absolutely not, Suzanne replied immediately. I advised against it as well, Rosa agreed. But he's threatening to withdraw his cooperation entirely unless you meet him on his terms. Why would he risk complicating the deal at this point? Debbie wondered. What does he gain by meeting in private? Doris, who had been quiet since reading the letter, finally spoke. He wants to control the environment. This is his last attempt to manipulate the situation. We're not going to his penthouse, Suzanne declared firmly. But we can compromise. Neutral ground, private, but public enough to ensure security. After a brief discussion, they agreed on a private dining room at an upscale restaurant. Rosa made the arrangements while the sisters prepared for the confrontation, each processing the revelation in her own way. Debbie kept returning to the photograph of Steve Lawrence, the man she had always believed was her father. He knew, she said softly. He knew we weren't his biological children, and he loved us anyway. He was our real father, Doris affirmed. Biology doesn't change that. So, what do we do about Ed? Suzanne asked, the pragmatist as always. Do we tell him we know? The sisters looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. We wait, Debbie decided. Let's hear what he has to say first. The private dining room of Lasserre was elegantly appointed, with soft lighting and privacy screens ensuring their conversation wouldn't be overheard. The sisters arrived first, positioning themselves on one side of the table, a united front. When Ed entered, they were struck by how much he had aged in just the few days since their confrontation in the boardroom. His hair seemed grayer, his face more lined, his confident posture diminished. His lawyer accompanied him but took a seat at a separate table, giving them space while remaining within earshot. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ed said as he sat down across from them. The formal pleasantries felt absurd given their history. Let's not waste time, Suzanne replied coolly. You wanted this meeting. Why? Ed studied their faces, his expression unreadable. Before I sign away everything I built, there's something I need to know. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. Did Kathy ever tell you about your father? The sisters exchanged glances, their earlier suspicion confirmed. He knew. Which father are you referring to? Debbie asked carefully. Steve Lawrence, or you? Ed's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of his surprise. So, she did tell you? Not directly, Doris said softly. We just found out today. Ed nodded slowly, absorbing this information. I suspected, of course, the timing, but Kathy never confirmed it. By the time I began to truly wonder, we were already married, and it seemed complicated to ask. That doesn't explain why you abandoned us, Suzanne said, her voice hard. Even if you weren't sure we were your wife's children you'd helped raise for years. I was angry, Ed admitted, not meeting their eyes. When Kathy died, I was consumed with grief and rage. I'd lost the only woman I'd ever truly loved, and I was left with 3 constant reminders of her and possibly of my greatest mistake. Abandoning your children at a gas station isn't a mistake, Debbie countered. It's cruelty. I'm not defending it, Ed said. I'm trying to explain. After Kathy died, I found an old letter she'd written to Steve, but never sent. In it, she mentioned the possibility that I might be your biological father. It sent me into a tailspin. I'd spent years suppressing my resentment toward you 3, not because of who you were, but because of what you represented, Kathy's life before me, her love for Steve. So, you left us at a gas station to punish us for existing? Doris asked, her quiet voice cutting. No, Ed replied, looking genuinely pained. I left you because I couldn't bear to look at you and see both Kathy and my own failure. It was cowardly and unforgivable. I know that. Yet here you are, asking for what, exactly? Suzanne pressed. Forgiveness, understanding? Ed straightened in his chair, some of his customary authority returning. I'm asking for the truth. Did the FBI contact you about their investigation into Kathy's death? The abrupt change of subject caught them off guard. Yes, Debbie answered cautiously. They found evidence that her medication was tampered with. I didn't kill Kathy, Ed said firmly, looking each of them in the eye. I loved her, despite everything, but I know who did. The sisters stared at him in shock. What are you talking about? Suzanne demanded. Ed reached into his jacket and removed a small flash drive, placing it on the table between them. Security footage from our home, dated the week before Kathy died. I've kept it all these years, not knowing what to do with it. If I came forward, I risked implicating myself because of how I behaved afterward, hiding assets, changing the will. Who? Debbie asked, her voice barely audible. Lucille Rossi, Ed replied, the woman I married years later. She was my assistant during my marriage to Kathy. We were having an affair. The revelation hung in the air, the implications slowly sinking in. Kathy discovered the affair, Ed continued. She confronted Lucille, threatened to divorce me with evidence of the infidelity. The prenuptial agreement would have left me with almost nothing. So, your mistress poisoned our mother? Doris asked, her normally gentle voice shaking with anger. I didn't know until after Kathy died, Ed insisted. When I found out, I was trapped. If I went to the police, I'd be the prime suspect, so I married Lucille to keep her close, to find proof. When I finally had it, I divorced her immediately. But you never came forward, Suzanne pointed out. And you still abandoned us. Like I said, Ed replied, his voice heavy with regret, I was a coward. The sisters sat in stunned silence. Just when they thought they had assembled all the pieces of their past, the puzzle had been completely reshuffled. Why tell us this now? Debbie finally asked. Ed pushed the flash drive closer to them. Because if the FBI investigation continues, they'll eventually find this footage. And when they do, they'll wonder why I buried it for 25 years while building an empire on Kathy's foundation. You want us to make this go away, Suzanne realized. To protect you. I want justice for Kathy, Ed countered. And I want to make amends as much as I can to the 3 of you. My daughters. The word hung in the air between them, daughters, not stepdaughters. The truth they had only just discovered themselves. There's one more thing you should know, Ed, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lucille is back in the country. She reached out to me last month, asking for money. When I refused, she threatened me. Threatened you? How? Doris asked. She said she'd make sure I lost everything, Ed replied. That she hadn't spent 2 decades planning for nothing. As the implications of his words sank in, the restaurant's maitre d' appeared at the doorway, his expression troubled. Mr. Frankel, he said. There's a woman insisting on seeing you. She says it's urgent. A Miss Rossi. The sisters watched as all color drained from Ed's face. Lucille Rossi stood in the doorway of the private dining room,